July 1st through the 3rd of 1863 on the Daniel Lady Farm. As Confederate troops advanced through the town of Gettysburg on the afternoon of July 1st, the Union's 1st Division, 12th Corps under General Alpheus Williams arrived on the farm, intending to secure nearby Benner's Hill. Williams decided to storm the hill. His skirmishers reached the area to the west of the barn, where they exchanged some light fire with Virginia skirmishers higher up the hill. Before they can advance further, they were recalled, retracing their steps, eventually taking position on Culp's Hill. Soon thereafter, Major General Edward Johnson's division of Confederate regiments from Virginia, Maryland, Louisiana, and North Carolina cautiously arrived on the farm. On July 2nd, the farm became a staging area and headquarters for Johnson's preparation for the attack on the Union flank at Culp's Hill. Confederate artillery moved from the farm to nearby Benner's Hill at 4 p.m., began to fire on Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill in advance of Johnson's attacks, until overwhelmed and silenced by Federal guns within a few hours. The house and barn were converted to a field hospital occupied by wounded and dying soldiers. The attack would begin again on the morning of July 3rd. Confederate forces retreated after the third day, leaving the most seriously wounded at the farm, later to be moved to the nearby Union Field Hospital, Camp Letterman. The house and barn survived the battle. The furniture in the house was used to comfort some, but was also used for cook fires and for hospital use. As you tour the house, you will see the bloodstains from the wounded and dying. When you tour the barn, you will see where Confederate soldiers carved their initials in a door jamb and a fragment of the Union cannonball still lodged in a floor joist. The bloody fight begins. General Henry Heth is most famous for his actions at the Battle of Gettysburg. He had sent elements of his division ahead of the main body of his troops in order to provide reconnaissance. Brigadier General John Buford's objective on June 29th was to secure the town of Gettysburg for consolidation of the army. As such, Buford avoided prolonged combat. The Confederate brigades made contact with Buford's Union cavalry and spread out into battle formation. Although Confederate General Robert E. Lee had ordered that any unnecessary contact with the enemy was to be avoided, Heth's actions made this order useless, thus beginning the Battle of Gettysburg. Buford conducted his own extensive reconnaissance of the terrain around the town, talking with civilians, and visited his own forces to gather the most complete assessment of the enemy. He came to realize that a substantial force under General A.P. Hill was as close as 9 miles away. Buford's men spread out in long, thin lines, utilizing the available cover provided by the terrain. The defensive plan for the Union cavalry commander focused on the series of ridges surrounding the town. His initial defense would occur along McPherson and Seminary ridges to the north and west of the town, permitting his units to retreat and fight through the town and onto Cemetery Ridge if Confederate pressure was more than he and any Union reinforcements could handle. Battle commenced early on July 1st, and Buford's troops fought well against the Confederates. While the Confederates succeeded in dislodging the Union Army from Seminary Ridge on the first day of battle, they could not press the issue effectively on Cemetery Ridge. As the Union Army regrouped on the ridge, Buford's cavalry again exercised both mounted and dismounted maneuvers to confuse, impede, and distract the Confederates. During the battle, General Heth received a severe wound to the head. He was wearing a hat that was too large and stuffed with papers to make it fit. The papers probably deflected the bullet to avoid a fatal wound, but Heth was knocked unconscious and effectively out of the battle. 2 days later, after Pickett's charge, Heth recovered enough to command during the retreat back to Virginia and the minor engagements of the fall of 1863. It is exactly 28 years ago today since this organization was formed in the city of Rochester. And for more than a quarter of a century since, we fought here, as Lincoln declared on this historic field, that a government of the people, for the people, and by the people should not perish from the earth. In this long interval, nearly a generation, I believe that few, if any, of us ever have set foot on this scene where for 3 days raged one of the fiercest battles of modern times, and where our desperate, courageous, but misguided foes fought for their last great sake on northern soil. As you recall your activity amid the death throes and din of that tumultuous strife, you may well feel proud that Battery L was permitted to do its appointed share in securing the great victory which settled the fate of the Republic. You may well reflect, too, that this triumph was not easily purchased nor cheaply won, and had we suffered a reverse here of the magnitude of some of those which overcame the Army of the Potomac in its earlier history, the face of modern civilization might have been changed. Suppose, for instance, the army of General Lee, with its sullen resolve and impetuous daring to strike panic into the northern heart, and hence to secure influential political allies in our rear, had successfully occupied Harrisburg, Philadelphia, and New York. Would not have been the termination of the war? It is perhaps idle to speculate upon such a contingency. Yet we who passed through the greatest civil war in all history all know there is no such thing as certainty in the result of the clash of conflicting armies, such as we witnessed here. But the victory was priceless all the same, and the survivors of this field, remembered by a grateful people, have written over this undulating surface, in granite and marble and bronze, the story of that 3 days' triumphant struggle, making this battlefield unique for all time. Pass over the fields of Waterloo, of Austerlitz, of Sadowa, or Gravelotte, and you behold nothing to mark the gigantic strife of nations on those famous theaters of war. It has remained for America to remember her sons who fell, as we see them, commemorated on those diversified acres, and certainly we cannot feel otherwise than proud that not the least among the commands who have a monument here is our veteran battery, which I had the honor to command during the latter part of the battle. In keeping with the proprieties of this occasion, I have prepared, with the assistance of Lieutenant Shelton, a sketch of the part which this battery took in the action. I have also prepared a brief sketch of Battery L, and a complete roster of the command from the date of its organization until it was finally mustered out of service at Elmira, June 17, 1865. Most of the data for the following sketch of Reynolds' battery at Gettysburg are taken from the official report of the General Wainwright to General Hunt, Chief of Artillery, and bearing date July 17, 1863. We are indebted to the politeness of Major Cooney at the New York headquarters of the Gettysburg Monuments Commission for access to the advance sheets of a government work on Gettysburg not yet published and which contains report aforesaid. On the night of June 30th of 1863, Reynolds' battery was encamped with the batteries and troops of the 1st Corps about 2 miles from Emmitsburg along the pike leading to Gettysburg. Marching orders were received about 8 o'clock in the morning of the 1st of July. We were soon apprised of the presence of the enemy by the sound of skirmish firing ahead, and between 10 and 11 o'clock the battery was drawn off the road and parked in a field, but a short distance from the Seminary Grove. Those of us who were present at the time will remember the clouds of cavalry skirmishers which, having been relieved by the infantry, were falling back down the hillsides which hid the village of Gettysburg from our view. Leaving the saisons at this point, the battery advanced into the fields between the town and the Lutheran seminary. The first mention of the battery in the report says, directing Captain Reynolds to move his battery of 6 3-inch guns forward, I rode up unto the bridge, but finding that the battery would be exposed and totally without support, I withdrew it before it reached the crest. After occupying one of the two positions advancing, Battery L was ordered to relieve Tidball's horse battery, and it was during the execution of this movement that Captain Reynolds was wounded, and the command of the battery devolved upon Lieutenant Breck. Captain Reynolds is mentioned in the report as gallantly refusing to leave the field. At this point, the battery was certainly without infantry support and subjected to severe crossfire from our right. Both batteries, says the report, were obliged to retire. Many of us can remember the plunging shots of the enemy throwing up the black earth in rear of the carriages as they fell back across the soft stubble field to the next ridge. General Wainwright continues, receiving another request from General Wadsworth for some guns in his front, I posted Lieutenant Wilbur with a section of Company L, 1st New York, in the orchard on the south side of the Cashtown Road, where he was sheltered from the fire of the enemy's battery on his right flank by the intervening houses and barn, and moved the remaining 4 pieces around to the south side of the wood on the open crest. Some confusion about the seminary and cemetery ridges seems to have prevailed at this stage of the battle, and Colonel Wainwright, understanding the former instead of the latter was to be held at all hazard, proceeded with his usual tenacity of purpose to post his batteries at this end. The firing of Lieutenant Breck's guns was much interfered with by our own infantry moving in front of his pieces. I withdrew Lieutenant Breck's 2 sections when the first line was within about 200 yards, and ordered him behind a strong stone wall on the seminary crest. At this juncture, the infantry support was rapidly withdrawn by conflicting orders, and it was not until such support was seen in full retreat towards the town that the limbers were ordered to the rear, and the batteries moved at a walk down the Cashtown Road until the infantry had all left the road and passed behind and under cover of the railroad embankment. By this time, the enemy's skirmishers had lapped our retreating column within 50 yards of the road. The pike being clear, the batteries broke into a trot, but it was too late to save everything. Lieutenant Wilbur's last piece had the off-wheel horse shot, and as he had just disentangled it, 3 more of the horses were shot down, and his own horse killed, so it was impossible for him to bring it off. It affords me pleasure to say that not the slightest blame can be attached to Lieutenant Wilbur in the loss of his gun.